Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_that. All right. Today, at least in part, because I don't know how long it's going to take, I want to kind of nerd out a little bit. It's one of those things where something comes up and it just kind of sparks something in my brain, and I start exploring, and I think, why don't I just do this for the podcast? Because first of all, I have to get started, because time is a ticking as I'm sitting here just theorizing. Well, what if I did this? Well, what if this happened? Well, what about this? Well, how do you do it? Blah, 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 blah. I think at its core is some pretty basic things, and I know that can be maybe for some people kind of an eye roll. And so there's kind of two reasons. Number one, people do need to hear this. It's just the reality. Some people, it's kind of like I've done before in the past. This will be something similar, but not quite, with PFF, where it's like, I'll kind of do a PFF thing and then I'll say, but I know it's not for everyone, as though it's equally valid to say it's useless as it is to say it's useful, and that's incorrect. We can prove that it's useful, et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously, Bears fans are just complete idiots, and that's where this whole thing started. I mean, they are the dumbest fan base. I mean, everybody's got their weird things. Packer fans have their weird things. I can't really see it from the outside looking in, but I can see it from the inside looking in. Vikings fans have their things. Lions fans have their things, like with the refs and everything. Bears fans are just stupid. I mean, I was in the U46 school system. I understand. I get it. It's not a great school system. Pretty stupid. In fact, bad schools. But it's wild, the lack of comprehension. And who knows, maybe Bears fans on social media, like Bears fans tend to be more like 1986 guys. They're on Facebook and nowhere else. And so when you see Bears fans on X or on whatever, TikTok, they're all Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I think that's the things now. I can't freaking keep up. I don't know. But I also think, as far as Packer fans, there's a little hint of that. Like, for example, when we talk about the Bears and kind of where they rank, there's a feeling of, I think they're actually good, and we should stop pretending that they're not. And again, there's something, you should never underestimate any opponent. Anyone can win on any given Sunday. The Bears also could just get better, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is, we do have metrics, and they're not just like this arbitrary nerd thing that it's like, I mean, if you're into that, you can believe that, but I choose not to. Okay, you can choose not to believe in gravity either, but that's stupid, and you're going to hurt yourself. So I kind of wanted to start there, and then I started digging into some other things. I found some new things, and then I also kind of thought about something that is, it's going to be... I'm trying to figure out how to do this, because on one hand, I want to be like, here's why DVOA is smart. And then on the other hand, after spending all that time doing that, explaining why it's not great. At least a thought that I had. And it was because something else had popped up. Maybe we should start there. I think we should start with that, because otherwise it's going to be, well, what the heck did we waste all our time doing all that for? So I want to introduce... And again, this is one of those extremely obvious things. It's something that I have talked about a ton, but yet even I don't think to include it in my analysis, I guess you would say, if I can find it in my 60 billion tabs. So this is kind of, it was two things that were separate that ended up blending together as I was screwing around today. Aaron Schatz, who is the inventor of DVOA, posted this chart. It's the 2025 Carolina Panthers DVOA by week. It says, here's one of my week-to-week DVOA charts to show how wackadoo the Carolina Panthers season has been. The bad games are really bad, but they've gotten 7 wins here, 6 of which have DVOA above 0, which is above average. And then he says they're at minus 6.6% for the Packers wins. So that was surprisingly the closest to average of all of them. Just as a sense of scale, the game against New England is nearly minus 100%, which is crazy. And then on the other hand, the week prior against Atlanta was their best game. at about 50%. So they went from 50% to about minus 100%. The reason that I bring this up, and this is going in favor of the Bears, for example, if they wanted to, in an intelligent way, fire back at me, this would be the best way to do it when I bring up DVOA or anything like that. When you talk about schedule adjusted, in other words, the Bears haven't beat anybody good. How do we know that? Well, you look at their teams they've beat and then look at those teams' records. Whoops. I thought we weren't doing the record thing. Oh, well, I mean, we don't have to use record. We could use something else. The point is, one of the things that, for example, DVOA does not capture very well, at least to my understanding they do not, is this exact variation. So what DVOA will do is look at, how good of a game you had. And it's not just points. They do a much better job of looking at, on a play-to-play basis, how good of a job you did. And maybe there's something in that helps. I don't know. I still haven't fully fleshed this out. Again, I have to get started here. So this is still me trying to figure it out as we go along. But teams are not a monolith. They're not just a single entity. And this is what Packer fans a lot of the time will not accept. Well, the Packers lost to Cleveland. How could they be any good? Okay, well, what is Cleveland? And the problem is, if you give me a single answer of they are this bad, you're already wrong, because nobody is the exact same level of talent every single week. Nobody's even the same any 2 weeks of a season. And so essentially there is this massive range. And this is where it gets complicated, especially with the NFL, because when you look at any team, like take the worst team in football and have them play their absolute best possible game, and then take the best team in football and have them play their absolute worst possible game, the best team is not only going to lose, they're going to get blown out because the ranges overlap so much. I know that because that happens kind of all the time. Bad teams beat good teams. And assuming you're not getting the absolute best possible game from the worst team and the absolute worst possible game from the good team, probably ever, I feel comfortable saying that, yes, it would be a blowout. And so, again, without having necessarily an answer for this, there are kind of minor things here and there, it's at least important to keep that in mind. So, again, considering I pick on the Bears so much, I will use them as an example of maybe why they should be cut some slack. Probably not. Again, we'll get there. But if I were a Bears fan, this is at least a decent retort, I guess. Every single week, each team has a massive range of what their best and what their worst looks like. So for any given week, I can only answer a question halfway. So they lost to the Vikings. Everybody knows that doesn't mean they're worse than the Vikings. Now, if we were able to get them to play each other 1,000 times, we could probably get a decent idea of which team is actually better than the other. Maybe even 100 times. Okay, you won 55 times. I think you're better. But that's obviously not a thing that's ever going to happen. We know that intuitively. It's not a good sign that you lose to Minnesota, but it doesn't mean you're worse than Minnesota, especially when it's 3 points. There's so many fluky things that happen throughout a game. 3 points is basically nothing. It tells you nothing about which team is better than the other. It's probably part of the reason why numbers people like blowouts, because there can be no question about a blowout. It wasn't because of fluky things. It was that you were better on that day. Now, that still doesn't fully answer the question, but at least we know who was better on that day. But here's the problem. When I look at the Detroit Lions game the next week, the Bears lost 52-21. The Lions were clearly a significantly better team on that day. Here's what I don't know, even leaving out the part where teams have changed over the course of a season. The fact of the matter is, teams change from day to day. You could have them play the next day and it might be a completely different result. What version of the Lions was that? Was that the Lions at their absolute best and the Bears at their absolute worst? In which case, if you normalize that and have them play both a, average performance, do the Bears win? Is it at least closer? Maybe that was both teams playing at about their median. In which case, that is at least at that time period an accurate representation of the Detroit Lions at home against Chicago. Maybe Detroit was a little bit off on that day. And Chicago was having kind of a good day, in which case Detroit is significantly better. You get my point, right? So DVOA can do a pretty good job of going through and saying, okay, you lost to Minnesota. That's bad because Minnesota is bad. But what if they weren't on that day? What if they just had a really flukily good day? And it's not a reflection so much on your team as it is on what that team did on that day. And I don't know that there's an answer that you can ever fully figure that out. I have a couple thoughts. For example, there are metrics, although they're so distant from comprehensive metrics. That's the thing. Comprehensive metrics put everything in a big bucket together. The problem is there's a bunch of nonsense mixed in there. What you could do is separate out, for example, I could look at a quarterback and look at their how well the quarterback played when not under pressure. That would be a better representation, at least of what the quarterback did, because it's not a factor of the other team creating pressure to put them in a tough situation. You know what I mean? But also, I can't tell you how good a team is just based on how the quarterback played. There's too many other people involved. And so unless I'm going to do that for everybody, which I can't, I mean, how could I do that with a tackle? You know, Zach Tom had a great day because he shut down Aiden Hutchinson. Maybe Aiden Hutchinson is having a bad day. His puppy died and he was sad and he didn't feel like playing. Maybe he had a stomach flu. I can't really know that. So that ends up being sort of the biggest red flag for some things like DVOA, at least insofar as my understanding of DVOA, or at least how much they opponent adjust. I guess the question I would have is, do they capture some of that with their looking at efficiency on a play-to-play basis? I don't know. So that is I'm kind of just going to put it out there and then leave it there because I don't really have anything to resolve that, but it's at least something to consider. Number one for other teams, but also for the Green Bay Packers, right? Again, well, the Packers lost to da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yes, but if you remember, that was the Packers playing well below what their average is, and I can't really speak to Cleveland because I don't remember. And I could go back and look at the DVOA thing to see the week-to-week for each one to see what version of that team we got according to that, however that works, or try to find some other week-to-week metric. But for example, I can look at the Carolina Panthers, which I don't think anyone necessarily sees them as a terrible team. But the issue is if we just look at Carolina based on sort of their average, or even for some of us, it's based on that one time I watched them and they were terrible. Right? They had that one terrible game. How could you lose to that team? They lost 42-13 to New England. Right? So how is it that you couldn't do better than that? Well, because they didn't play that bad. If they had played that poorly, I think a lot of teams, if they were that bad all the time, a lot of teams would have done that to them. They're not that bad all the time. And so we know that any team can beat any team at any time. The Packers do have, even the most negative fans, I'm so sorry to tell you this, the Packers do have the ability to beat any single team in the NFL today. Also, any other team has the ability to beat the Packers. And that's true of, it's not just because the Packers are so volatile. That's true of every single team in the NFL. And then, you add in the additional variable of teams are not the same as they were in week 3. They're not even the same as they were last week. They're not going to be the same next week. Trying to capture any one thing and pin it down is nearly useless. Now, it's obviously not useless, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about after the break. But I think there is an over-reliance to the point where, and again, this is where I'm mostly speaking to the negative fans. It could also be for people like me from a more statistic standpoint, but mostly for the negative fans. There is just this feeling of, if you're this, then this will happen. No. Well, if you really are a top 5 or 10 team, then you have to be, no, that's not how that works. The Rams are still the best team in football, by the way. That hasn't changed. I don't even think it's close. The fact that they lost this past week to the Panthers barely moves the needle at all. Why? Because it's not true that if you really are X, Y, and Z, then you should be able to beat the Panthers. I mean, by the way, they are able to. They just didn't in this instance. Another way to look at it is if we play the Chicago Bears 100 times, I don't think either of them wins 60 times. And so it's just a matter of, if you reach into that bag, are you going to pull out a W or pull out an L? It's maybe 60-40. We got to stop pretending as though, if we beat the Bears, then it's definitive, it's over, and they can never beat us. And if we lose to the Bears, well, then that settles it. They're better than us, and they're a real legit team, and we're not as good as we thought. It's not what it means at all. Again, if you want to run that 100 times and see how many times you win, then I'll have an understanding of how much better or worse a team is. One time doesn't tell me anything. I mean, think about it. A coin is 50-50. If you flip it, the odds that it ends up being 2 heads or 2 tails is just as good as the odds of you splitting. But if you get 2 heads or 2 tails, does that mean that tails are more likely to come up, or that tails are better than heads, or that it's a weighted coin? No, it's just random. Well, if heads was just as good as tails, then why did tails beat it twice in a row? Bro, I don't know. It's just random. There's no bigger meaning behind it than that. And this is where I think extended periods of time are the most helpful. The reason good teams end up in the playoffs isn't because they're perfect, isn't because they always beat the good teams or always beat... This is where people try to find meaning in everything. Well, the Packers they can beat anybody, but they can't beat any of the good teams. And then the next time it's, well, yeah, I mean, they can beat the good teams, but you keep losing to bad teams. That's how you know you're bad. No, it's neither of those things. This comes down to very simple statistics. If you have 60-70% chance to win over a longer period of time, you're going to end up with more wins. Sometimes that 30% is going to hit and you're going to lose. But more often than not, it's going to hit. And you end up with more wins than losses. And the variance between that, by the way, the odds that there's going to be a team with 10 wins that should have only had 7 and not be in the playoffs are relatively high. The odds that a good team is going to miss the playoffs are relatively high. And the odds that you can actually tell the difference between a 12-win and a 10-win team are 0. You can't tell. Not based just on wins. Time is also the variable that helps me to feel as though the Chicago Bears thing is not just a one-off. The fact that this has been consistent. The only teams that they beat are the bad teams. The only teams that the teams that they lose to are the good teams. Now, Philly, you could say, is an outlier, but again, this is where if you look at the actual quality of the Philadelphia Eagles, that's where that kind of variable, I guess, would come in. But anyways, all right, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to kind of express on the other side of this the value of actually looking at the quality of the teams, why they matter, why they're real and not just some imaginary nerd thing that people just randomly throw together, and then looking at specifically Green Bay compared to Chicago, because that's, I mean, I guess we could do the NFC North, but that's what we got coming up. So take a break. We'll be right back. Okie dokie, folks. All right, let's start building in the other direction now. So we've essentially established that nothing is perfect. With that said, if we start from 0 being entirely arbitrary, in other words, there are no rules, nothing means anything. We're completely nihilistic when it comes to all stats because you never actually know in any given Sunday and all that stuff. The question is, can we make any progress away from that? And this is kind of where I think Bears fans are trying to be stupid. Yeah, well, you lost to Cleveland, and so it all just kind of, you never know, and everything is this and that, and blah, 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 blah. Of course, not when it comes to wins. That's the only thing that matters because they currently have a high win total. Congrats to them about that. But if they can convince us to just be nihilists in regard to everything else, so that nothing matters and you can't know anything, and so ultimately, yeah, nobody actually earns anything or gets any other wins or whatever, but we got them. And that's all that anybody needs to know, and there's no other information. Now, my retort to that when it comes to Bears fans or whatever is to essentially kind of skip over the middle and say, we know certain things, and we can measure certain things, and then I'll throw DVOA at them or LO at them or whatever it is, all these different things, and they just roll their eyes like it's just this useless nonsense. But again, let's take it step by step. First of all, and I will always come back to this, people will lie all the time on social media. They'll say this, that, or the other. What they won't do is lie with their money. And that's why I love coming back to Vegas. Because first of all, I can always catch up Bears fans when I say, okay, if you believe that, then go drop $1,000 on the Bears to win the division. I've been saying this for like 3-4 weeks. Of course, none of them will do it. They won't even put $5 on it. I did find one guy to not only bet that the Bears would win, he bet the Bears would win, and then 2 other games just to kind of spite Packer fans. I at least admire that he's willing to do that. But all that really does is prove that Bears fans don't even believe their own bull crap. The more important part about Vegas is that if anybody could find the tiniest little edge against what Vegas says. So first of all, if everything's arbitrary, that means when Vegas comes out and says, this team is going to win by 7, they'll give you the spread is -7. Always just bet against the spread. Always just bet for 0. Why wouldn't you always do that? Well, because you know that that's kind of silly. We actually do know some things. So then the question just becomes, okay, well, how do we know those things? We're already 75% of the way there. The only thing else we need to do is to essentially say, okay, let's say we want to build. I was actually just watching a YouTube video. I found some that's boxing, some pretty interesting stuff here. There's a website called unbaited.com, or excuse me, unabated, not unbaited. That's a different thing. That's throwing a hook in the water without a worm on it. But they actually have some YouTube videos. Let me go back here because I think that's kind of just talking about betting and all that different kind of stuff. Interesting little details. And what Unbaited has is, this is a new thing I've just kind of learned about. They are the creators of what are called the Massey ratings. I can find it here. I've got a Massey-Peabody ratings. I'm trying to not be all over the place, but just hang in there, okay? This is actually really important when it comes to just understanding this stuff, because we spend too much time being nihilists. Well, we don't actually know that, and we don't. Yes, we do, and I can prove it to you. Again, the easiest way I can prove it to you, just go bet against Vegas every single time. If you're not willing to do that, then you acknowledge that Vegas does know something. And if Vegas knows something, you have to ask the question, how do they know? And that's what we investigate. That's what we explore. How can we get those numbers to look like that? So Massey-Peabody, it's actually a very well-respected thing. When I was doing research for this podcast and kind of looking around, there's the obvious ones, DVOA and ELO or LO or whatever. And then they mentioned Massey-Peabody. And I think I did know about this, but I kind of forgot. Anyways, what they have are the rankings and then the ratings. And the rating system is essentially pretty easy to figure out because, for example, if you look at the Packers, their rating is 5.05. And similar to DVOA, what that means is if you have a perfectly dead average team, the Packers would be 5.05 points better than an average team. They are ranked 6th at 5.05. The Chicago Bears are ranked 21st. Now, again, I'm kind of all over the place. We'll go through some of these ratings. I just want to first and foremost establish that these things are not just arbitrary, stupid things that guys with calculators come up with just to mess around and be stupid. Anybody that wants to doubt what I'm saying has an opportunity to put their money down, and I promise you, you will lose all your money. If every single week you just say, I don't think that's true, 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 you will eventually run out of money. The Chicago Bears rank 21st at a minus 1.48. So, if you want to figure this out, all you'd have to do is take the Packers at 5.05 plus, where are the Bears? 1.48, because it's negative. And so they have them at 6.53 as essentially the spread, right? And so you can directly apply this to Vegas if you want to. So what I would do if I wanted to just use this system is I would say, okay, so the spread is 6.53. So if there's any major deviation from that, I would bet on that. Take a wild guess what the spread is. It's exactly 6.5. So the Massey-Peabody system has this at a 6.5 point difference. Vegas has it at exactly 6.5. That isn't to say, first of all, I know Massey-Peabody doesn't just use Vegas because I know essentially what they do. And they have their own system that will calculate all this. Has nothing to do with Vegas. I also am relatively certain that Vegas isn't just using Massey-Peabody to come up with stuff. What I essentially assume happens is when you use good data, everybody comes to roughly the same conclusions. That good data, I promise you, is not just looking at wins and losses. And again, I know this sounds like common sense, but at the same time, I sound like a biased Packer fan when I come out here and I'm like, oh, the Bears are actually ranked. I had people on social media being like, bro, just like you sound pathetic when you talk like this and all that. It's like, it's like, oh, that's just cope. You're just coping. Like I promise you. I fully acknowledge this is kind of close to a coin flip game. I don't have any sort of massive confidence in the Packers winning. I think they'll win. It's above 50%, but not a ton over. It should never be a ton over 50%. But if you're going to come out and just say nonsense, I can't handle that. Well, the Bears are the better team because look at their record. I mean, come on, man. But the interesting thing about the video that they did is they actually demonstrated how to create a rating system. It's actually really cool, and I might kind of use it, or at least start playing with it with some other contexts. I was thinking in terms of like my NFL draft, which is just a massive data project. It'll probably end up going a similar way, but essentially what they showed is like you could take any statistic you want, and you could do this with wins and losses as well, very easily. And he went and looked at, I think it was last year's point differential or something like that, and he also adjusted for home and away and all that. And then on another sheet, you just do a normal ranking system. You want it to be able to go negative, so he went from 16 to negative 16. And then he runs the little calculation thing that is built into Excel. First of all, just says the error. So the reason you can just put whatever ranking you want is because it'll pop up some massive error saying, like, here's how much you suck with your ranking system. In other words, if you apply that ranking system back into it, your win-loss thing is going to be terrible. So then you just look at it and say, okay, that's fine. I want you to calculate it so that you get this error as close to zero as you possibly can. And what that'll do is it'll essentially apply different weights to the scoring and all that kind of stuff, and you'll have your own rating system. And essentially that is all Massey-Peabody is, except they have not really proprietary, but their formula is essentially proprietary, the data that they put into it and all that different stuff. But the point is, when you look at that and you even just start thinking for 2 seconds, if I wanted to start building this, what would I do? And the fact that we have on social media conversations about how much your record matters is a complete and total joke. And again, we can prove that. Go build a ranking system with wins and losses. First of all, that little error is not going to get anywhere near zero. You're not going to be able to do that. But then when you try to apply that and look forward, the Bears, first of all, should be favorites in this game, right? And again, I'm annoyed with Bears fans as much as I'm trying to plead with Packer fans, because I know there is this self-conscious feeling of like, I don't know, dude, I think they're probably pretty good, and the numbers thing is just kind of this fluky nonsense. It's not. And again, that isn't to promise anything, because the better team loses all the time. I'm just pleading with you to understand the Packers are the better team, and that it's not necessarily very close, and that any reasonable metric that tries to actually look at, and again, this is a billion-dollar, trillion, I don't know how big, massive industry, and everybody is just cramming numbers, crunching numbers. That's the thing. Not cranking, not cramming, it's crunching. I don't know why, that's the thing. But you have the Massey-Peabody thing. The guy went to like the Wharton School of Finance or whatever, School of Business, but it was the School of, I don't know, Statistics or something. Very smart guy. Mathematical genius. And it's nothing but a bunch of mathematical geniuses trying to come out with these perfect formulas to be able to find even the tiniest little edge. Because actually, this was how, when you looked at, like DraftKings and stuff, there were massive companies. And essentially the way that they made money, because you're going up against other people, is you just needed to be a small percentage better than everybody else. And that's why, like, if you go against Vegas, the odds of you winning are not as massive, because Vegas is quite good at this. And they make really quick adjustments based on very professional bettors. So the professionals come out, they have all their systems, they go start slamming the money in, and then Vegas adjusts before you even have a chance to look at anything and all that stuff. Trying to beat Vegas is very difficult. But if you get into like DraftKings, where you're playing other sort of casual people who are just kind of going off the top of their dome, or maybe they got a little spreadsheet or whatever, all you need to be is 5%, 10% better across thousands of whatever, and you come out way ahead. And you make, and these companies are multi-million-dollar companies now that just play these little games with little bets against little people and just take tons and tons and tons of money. And so the point is, anybody that can find the tiniest little edge will be a multi-millionaire. But there's almost no edges left. Every little mathematical angle that you could possibly attack this with has already been figured out, for the most part. And so that's what we're dealing with when you look at things like this. That's why, it's just a coincidence that Massey-Peabody is 6.5 and Packers-Bears, Vegas has it set at 6.5. And all these things kind of come together and say roughly the same thing. Yeah, because they've squeezed that margin down so much that even if they're using somewhat different formulas, they end up coming to about the right conclusion. Nobody can predict the future. The Packers might win by 50, they might lose by 20, who knows what's going to happen. But what everybody has basically perfected is answering the question, how much better are the Packers than the Bears? And then they come out with 6.5 points better. That's what everybody has figured out. And they're basically 98% correct on that. That's not debatable. Now, what ends up happening, we don't know. But that's why we set that little buffer in there. Because it could fall in either direction, but that is the middle point. That is the break-even point, is 6.5 points. And yes, home field advantage is factored in. Home field advantage is very minor. In fact, when Massey-Peabody did that YouTube video, part of what they did was calculate home field advantage. And it was a flawed system to begin with, but home field advantage was like 0.05 points. I mean, it was nothing. Now, I think this was closer to COVID, where home field was basically nothing, literally, because there were no people in the stands. But I think the thing about home field being 3 points is not really a thing anymore. Maybe we're getting closer to that. And I know it depends on, in fact, I can actually find the answer to that. We won't do it right now. Depends on the stadium and whatnot. But I don't think we can just automatically call it 3 points and say, well, the Packers are actually 3.5 points. In fact, Massey-Peabody is just the rating system, period. This has nothing to do with home and away. So if you believe it's 3 points, very easily, if the Packers on a neutral field are 6.5 points better, then it's closer to 9.5, and you'd bet the Packers. But I don't think home field advantage is that much of a thing that it would move the needle all that much. So again, these mathematical geniuses have already done a phenomenal job of defining how good, how quality teams actually are, reading through all the noise. And so when I tell you, even though there's disagreement depending on which one you look at, and they all calculate things slightly differently and they look at different things, and one of the things I'll try, not today, but I'm curious about, is if I went through and said Massey-Peabody says this, DVOA says this, LO says this, based on what they do and don't calculate, what does that tell you about the teams? It might be interesting. I don't know. Certain things we'll look at, why do they rank higher here than here? Well, maybe it's because, this one doesn't look at these types of things or whatever. I don't know. But does that make sense? It's not debatable. It's just not just nerd nonsense. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. Oh yeah, blah blah. No, this is settled. And for the 1,000th time, anyone that does, if you believe that I'm wrong, you will be a multimillionaire. Just go bet against Vegas every single time. Packers are 6.5 point favorites. Just say, no, they're not, and bet on the Bears. Denver Broncos, 7.5 point favorites. No, they're not, bet on the Raiders. If you want to be a nihilist about it and just say we don't know anything, then just bet against the favorite every single time. But you will lose because they do know, and they do know down to a very slim margin. And again, that doesn't mean they're going to get it right every time. That's not the point. The point isn't to get it 100% right. The point is to find the exact zero position, because the variability is from that point. As long as you can get perfect zero, Vegas will make money. And that's all they're really trying to do, is find that perfect middle point. I'm sure there's some nuance in there, but you get what I'm saying. All right. We'll take a final break, and when we come back, I want to actually look at these very real statistics to show the very real gap between the Packers, who are better, and the Bears, who are worse. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right, so part of the problem with doing this today is a lot of these are not updated. So let me refresh a couple of these and just see if we got lucky. But some of these are going to be still using essentially last week's data, which is fine because it's still, first of all, it's not going to move the needle a ton either way. The Bears and Packers probably both went up a little bit with their recent wins. But for the sake of illustration and knowing that it doesn't move the needle all that much, again, 6.5 points is what Vegas says and what Massey-Peabody says. Again, we already went over it, but to be clear, the Green Bay Packers are the number one team in the NFC North, according to Massey-Peabody. I think Detroit and Green Bay are the two kind of interchangeable ones, depending on where you look. This is one of the few that has the Packers out in front. But it has Rams 1, Seahawks 2, Chiefs 3, Philly 4, Baltimore 5, Green Bay 6. Again, Rams maybe a slight dip down. Philly, again, probably down. Packers maybe up. Whatever. They have Detroit 8th, Minnesota 19th, Chicago 21st. Now, there's going to be a lot of eye rolls about that one in particular. That's not super uncommon, to be very clear. There's essentially up near the top is Green Bay, Detroit, who are close. And then down near the bottom, Chicago and Minnesota are close. And it doesn't feel that way because Minnesota is terrible and they're losing all their games and they're all discouraged because they're losing all their games. And Chicago's feeling great and they're winning all their games and all that stuff. But the reality is, when you look at all the different metrics that they use, kind of reading between the lines and filtering out some of the noise. Let me give you an example. The more broad the number, the less useful it is. So that's where, record is completely useless. Something better than record would be points or point differential. That's actually a better metric. Even better than that, you could argue, would be net yards, which is how many yards you get minus how many yards you give up. The reason being, we're kind of filtering out some of the fluky luck stuff. So if the Vikings drive all the way down the field against the Bears and then throw a pick six, the defense got eviscerated that entire drive. But they ended up with 0 points, and the Bears ended up getting 7 points. And so the score reflects the Bears being much better, whereas on a play-to-play basis, the Vikings were significantly better up until that one play. And that's what a lot of these will do, is they filter out a lot of the luck stuff, which is why Chicago is low, because interceptions are really, really unreliable from week to week and from year to year. Very unreliable. So if you wanted to use some of these metrics like points or things that included all those interceptions, you're essentially saying, I think the Bears are better because I think they're just going to keep getting a bunch of picks. And what all the math nerds have figured out is that that's a losing wager. If you apply that, if you take money out of your wallet with that mentality and apply it, you will lose money. Now, the last several weeks, you would have won money with Chicago because everybody that has bet against Chicago, just waiting for that ultimate failure, has lost because that luck streak has just continued and continued. You probably listened to on the betting podcast. I think every week the man behind the curtain has bet against the Bears because he knows it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And it is, but it's just they have been incredibly lucky. Anyways, that's just an example of how they could contradict. Moving on. If we look at net yards per play, which is not, again, it's a little too broad, but it's not terrible. And if you just sort by that, you end up with usually the better teams on top, the worst teams at the bottom. Let's put it this way. It's better than record. The order is Seahawks, Broncos, Colts, Rams, Bills, Lions, Packers at 0.46. They don't have it numbered, and I'm not going to go through every single one. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 from the bottom is the Bears, who are negative 0.24, which is to say they give up more yards than they gain. Another indication that you're a less than, below than average team. Now you can overcome that with situationally, if you're really good on third downs, if you're good in the red zone, those kinds of things, high conversion rates, you can end up with higher scores compared to the yards. But generally speaking, not great to be negative in net yards. How about EPA? EPA is a good one, right? For those that aren't aware, EPA is a pretty simple formula. At any given time, depending on your spot on the field, if it's 1st and 10 from the 35, there is an expected points that you're going to get on this drive. If you were to bet if you were to gamble on how many points they're going to get, there would be a number. This is how much you're expected to get, and you would do more or less than that. So if it's 1st and 10 from the 35 and you throw a pass to the 50, the new expected points is going to jump, meaning something awesome just happened, as opposed to if you throw an incomplete pass, now it goes down, something bad happened. Did they go up? Did they go down? Well, this is split into offense and defense, but the Green Bay Packers on offense are third. On average, in each play, they add 0.13 points expected. Only the Colts and Chiefs have been better. The Bears rank 9th. Defensively, the Packers rank 14th, but the Bears rank 18th. So, if you're looking at EPA, the Packers are better. If you look at net yards, the Packers are better. If you look at the Massey rankings, the Packers are better. How about success rate? Very similar to EPA. Packers are 4th, Bears are 11th. Defensively, Packers are 11th, the Chicago Bears are 26th. Now, this one is actually interesting because it's not that hard to figure out. The Bears, as far as EPA, actually rank quite high, almost top 10. Well, an interception or a fumble recovery or whatever is massive in terms of EPA. It's a massive swing in terms of expected points, right? They might be borderline. They're sitting there with 5 expected points. You get a pick, that drops to 0. As far as success rate, success is either true or false. So if you're getting the crap kicked out of you all the way down the field and then you get a pick, that's success. But all those other plays, unsuccessful. So what percentage of the time is your defense successful? It's 46%. They rank 26th, meaning on a play-to-play basis, they're one of the worst defenses in football at just getting a stop. But when you factor things in, like interceptions and whatnot, they make it up to almost top 10 when it comes to EPA. What about my good friend DVOA? DVOA, again, does a very good job. It's not just win quality adjusted for opponent. They grade you on a play-to-play basis, similar to EPA per play, but then they adjust it for the opponent. And again, I've gone over what the potential flaws in that could be in terms of how they go about doing it, but the fact of the matter is doing it is better than not doing it. And so as I've said before, I'm a big fan of DVOA in terms of, I've literally put money on DVOA, as you know, and I've made money with it. But they have the Green Bay Packers 5th. They have Detroit 4th, and I don't think this is updated yet. So this is, it is week 13. They just updated it. Okay. So Green Bay, yes, because the Packers were at 17.3%. I think we just talked about that on the podcast. They're at 20.1 now. So they're up to 5th. They have not overtaken Detroit, but they're very close to being neck and neck here. So the Packers are 5th in DVOA, 20% better than an average team. Offensively, the Packers rank 4th. That's a pretty big jump at 16.3%. Defensively, 7th at minus 6.2. Where is Chicago? And remember, Chicago did just have a big win, so they did big time overtake Minnesota. Minnesota is plummeting. Chicago is rising. Minnesota is down to 27th. They were last week 25th. Chicago went from 22nd to 19th. So it was Chicago and Minnesota were neck and neck. 22nd and 25th, they have grown apart, obviously. But Chicago is still 19th, negative 5.2, so 5.2% worse than an average team. When you actually look at the metrics that matter on a play-to-play basis in terms of how good they are, I was going to illustrate what the two teams are next to them, but one of the other teams is one of the most successful teams in football that's also kind of a big fraud, and that's New England. New England is 18th. Atlanta is 20th. So they're kind of sandwiched in between there. There's a lot of teams that are hard to use because they're somewhat fraudulent. But if we go down, it's a little better. Atlanta, Arizona, Washington, in that range is kind of where they are. And if we compare offenses across the NFC North, Packers are the best in the NFC North, 4th. Detroit, 5th. Chicago, 12th, which is their strength, despite the defense. Again, the defense is seen as a strength, but a lot of it is just the takeaways. And Minnesota is all the way down here at 29th. Obviously, that offense is appalling. Defensively, Detroit is 6th. Green Bay is 7th. Minnesota is actually 11th. The defense is not bad at all. But Chicago is down here at 25th, kind of like what we saw with success rate, right? Play to play, down to down. And of course, DVOA is going to be looking less at things like EPA, which include the interceptions, and more at things at like success rate, because any good metric is going to want to remove anything lucky. By the way, and we'll do this with the other one of the other metrics as well, but if you look at estimated wins, in other words, based on how good you are, here is roughly how we would calculate the expected wins. And again, the variance is due to kind of the flukiness. So we would probably look at this, a lot of people would look at this and say, well, this is how wrong DVOA is. No, this is sort of, if we take how good you are and apply it to wins, this is roughly what you should have. However, again, there's so much variance that happens. And so you can be a 7-win team with 12 wins. That's not outside of the realm of statistics. That's within, considering how many random variables there are that happen all the time. I was thinking about this as an illustration. When you think about like how to calculate the luck thing, I was trying to figure this out. Like, how would you even figure that out? And it's kind of similar to like CPOE, the odds of doing something and then whether or not you did it. So a very easy throw, it would have a high completion percentage, right? Like, 90% of people would complete this pass. If you didn't complete that, that's a big negative. If you complete a pass that has low probability, that's a big positive for you. Similarly, imagine, for example, you are the Bears and the team gets down to the 35-yard line, or let's say they have a 35-yard field goal. If they make that field goal, they win, you lose. Now, this is one of the million variables that happen throughout a game that determine whether you actually win or lose. But where luck comes in is you would look at it and say, okay, this is 93% that this gets made. And I'm just making that up, but let's say 93% this gets made, 7% out of 100 times, 7 of them get missed. If they miss, it's not that it's not real, it's that you won the game based on something that had a 7% probability. And you can do that all throughout the game. And you can kind of add those things up to determine the amount of luck you're getting as opposed to, the amount of luck that happened against you that you subtract out. And you can do that with things like, tipped passes or fumbles or whatever. These things always happen, but they're low percentage things. And then, of course, the recovery is also, it's sort of a percentage thing. And so, again, what I'm essentially saying is if you look at things like this, or we'll look at ELO, I can never remember how to say it. I think it's ELO. They do something similar. These are more accurate in terms of how good you are and how many wins you probably should have if everything was perfect. If teams were just robots and they were exactly as good as they were just all the time and there was no variation, this is essentially how many wins you would have. Roughly. We can't perfectly calculate it, but roughly. The actual wins and losses you have is due to all the fluctuating variable nonsense. It's in a weird way, as much as the wins and losses are 100% real, in terms of the quality, or in terms of reading it back into quality, it's all just noise. There's nothing real about that number. Anyways, the Rams are at 12 wins, Seahawks at about 12 wins, and then it drops off quite a bit. Indy at 9.7, Detroit at 8.8, Green Bay at 8.6. So, 8.5 wins for Green Bay. A lot of times things line up. A lot of times they don't. Chicago, if we were to apply, and it's a good way to kind of describe how good or bad a team is, if their record was a reflection of how good their team actually is, they're at 5.8 wins. Call it 6. So the Packers, it's funny, they predicted them at being about 8.5 wins. That's literally how many wins they have with that tie, 8.5 wins. So they got that bang on. The Packers are what their record says they are. If we're being a little bit more honest, as though it feels intimidating because, oh man, it's a 9-win team coming into Green Bay. Not really. It's closer to a 6-win team. The Bears are more like a 6-6 team than a 9-3 team. And again, that doesn't mean we're guaranteed to win. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It's a division game. Those things are always weird. I generally don't even bet on them because there's so many fluky things that happen. But again, I'm not just saying things for the sake of cope. This is reality. The Bears are closer to a 6-6 team that is almost a touchdown worse than the Packers in terms of just the quality of the team. How this game turns out, I don't know. But what I said up to that point is 100% true. Then there is the ELO rankings. I think it's ELO. They use this in chess to kind of determine how good of a chess player you are. You have like an ELO ranking or whatever. And you can apply the formula to pretty much anything else. I think they use it for MMA as well. It's good for things like that where it's hard to kind of determine. We don't have a billion different stats or whatever, and there's a ton of people out there. So it's good for things like that. But everything kind of starts with a number. If you beat a good team, your number goes up. If you lose to a bad team, your number goes down. Margin of victory plays into it. Home and away matters. There's all these little things that go in there and kind of tweak your rating. And then over time, you kind of settle into like these are the ratings. And again, you can use this to determine point spread. And it will come out very close to what Vegas has. In fact, I think this one actually does. They will give you that. Well, they don't have week 14 up yet, but they do. So you can come on here. So these are all different things you can use, and whichever ones. And they've shown even the ELO is actually a little better than Vegas, I think, in terms of they've tracked it over time. Actually, that's this right here, model performance. Accuracy, 66.67% in terms of predicting winners. Against the spread, they're 55%. So again, you can look at the value of this and see that it is I've said this 1,000 times, any good stat is predictive. If it doesn't help you predict the future, it's no good. But if you look at the ELO ranking system, they have Rams 1, and again, I don't think this is updated from this current week. And again, these are all tools you can use. NFELOapp.com is where you can find this. There's a lot of free sites out there that have some pretty good data. This is a great site, has a lot of cool stuff. But based on this rating system, again, that's used to rank chess players and all that stuff, Rams 1, Lions 2, Packers are, I hate when they don't number stuff, 7th. So again, there's variation, but they all kind of tell a story. The Packers are around 5th. They're all saying they're top 10. They're not top 3. They're kind of in that, 4 to 7 range. The Bears, 16th. A little higher than some of the other ones, but again, more or less, they're kind of in that lower than average. So from, let's say, 16 to 22, somewhere in that range. Now, again, the Bears have a better record. They're a 9-win team. Isn't it weird that not a single one of these systems, not a single one of these mathematical models has the Bears better than the Packers? In fact, none of them are close. None of them are remotely close. 0 have the Bears top 10. 0 have the Packers outside of the top 10. In fact, they have a little spread thing here looking at value, which I think is very similar to the Massey system. It just tells you how many points better than average. Packers plus 4.2. Bears at 0.2. So this would be a little closer. We'll put it at 4 points. But that would essentially be the gap. The Packers are a team that is 4 points better than average. They also have a series of wins here. They have their ELO wins, which is based on their LO system, how many wins would you say that this team has earned? The Packers are 4th at 7.7. And again, this is prior to this week. So after this week, let's call it roughly 8.5-ish probably, which is right where they're at. The Bears are at 5.1. Again, add a game after this week, puts them at about 6 wins, which is exactly what DVOA said. They are like a 6-win team. The Vikings, by the way, 5.9. So they're already at 6 prior to this week. I don't know how much more they go up after this past week of garbage, but they're not going to be much worse than 6 wins. Then they have a thing called Pythagorean wins. Pythagorean wins, also known as Pythagorean expectation. It's called that because the formula looks like the Pythagorean theorem, which you probably remember from school, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's a pretty simple metric that has mostly to do with point differential, how badly you beat up on teams. But if you look at Pythagorean wins, and again, if you have good metrics, they're going to be very similar. They're going to be different, but similar. The Packers, 7.2. Again, add another win because it's a week behind. Very similar to the LO wins. Where are the Bears? Are they at 9 wins? What are they at? Nope, 5.4. Add a win, put them at 5.5-ish. Or excuse me, 6.5-ish. So that's 3 different mathematical models to reflect, based on how good you are, here's what your record essentially should be. I shouldn't say should, because I'm not implying that we should change the way that we look at wins. But this is about how, if we used wins as a metric, because we all kind of understand, which is the problem, by the way. We all understand how good a 9-win team is. So when the Bears, I'm talking about at this point in the season, a 9-win team, when the Bears wear that, we look at them and go, ooh, they're good. All this is doing is saying, well, no, if you want to look at how good a team is based on wins, then actually this is how many wins they have. The Bears unanimously across this are a 6-win team. They are in terms of how good they are, think of a 6-6 football team. So there we go. I don't know how much you guys, I never know what you guys want or what you like. I very much enjoy this. And again, this is what I was going to do all day anyways. I'm kind of just talking to you about it as I go through it. I enjoy thinking through these things because I feel like I need it. Sometimes I need to be, I talk to you as though like, come on, you dummy. But it's how I talk to myself sometimes, because I'll look at the Bears at 9 wins and like, I don't know, dude. I think listen, that's fake. You have to trust the numbers. All right. Again, that isn't to say, and the only reason I keep saying this is because I keep getting dummies on social media like, oh, what happened to your stats when you lost to the Cleveland Browns? It's not how stats work, stupid. All right? It's not how they work. Again, there's variability. Listen, if everything was exactly perfect and the Bears played exactly average based on their talent and the Packers played exactly, then I could tell you right now the Packers, well, they can't win by 6.5, but it'd be roughly a 7-point win by the Packers. But what we know is on a play-to-play basis, on every single snap, I mean, think about, when you think about how many variables there are, on every single snap, you've got 22 guys on a football field, plus the coaches. So you have a team of coaches coming up with individual plays. This team calls this play, this team calls this play. Already, there's a bunch of variables in here. Now we're doing the whole rock, paper, scissors thing. Then you've got a group of people, and every single person on that field is similar to a football team in terms of they have a range of how good they are. And on any given play, they might be up at the high level, they might be down at the low level. Oh, he frickin' slipped, and that threw this thing off, and everything's all thrown off now because one guy slipped. By the way, none of these models are good enough to pick up how often a guy's foot's going to slip. You know what I mean? So all these little tiny variables are how you end up with the underdog winning by 12. Well, what happened to your stats? Nothing happened to my stats. They are what they are, and they're extremely useful if you know what they're useful for. But you also have to understand what they're not. And they're not going to perfectly predict every single little thing. But again, All we're doing is we're establishing very clearly the Packers are a better team than the Chicago Bears, and that's not really debatable. And I can tell you right now, it's entirely possible that the Packers being a better team can go 0-2 against Chicago, and that doesn't change anything. Now, I'm not going to sit around here and brag about the Packers being better because that's somewhat pathetic, but I'm just telling you. Oh, it looks like you were wrong because we got swept. Nope. I'm not conceding that. Because again, this is very simple statistics. And I will say this one more time and then I'm going to get out of here. For those of you that have suffered through this the entire time, let's call the game 60-40 in favor of the Packers. You've got a big bucket with 100 little coins in it. There's 60 red coins. There's 40 blue coins. I tell you, there's more red coins than blue coins. And so you say, okay, then I'm going to pick 2 red coins. So you bet on that. I'm predicting I'm going to pull 2 red coins. First of all, right out of the gate, kind of iffy bet. But this is how we think as football fans. Well, if you say there's more, then I should pull 2. No, not necessarily. But I mean, if you had to bet, that might be your best bet. It's not a terrible bet. There's no good bet, but that's as close as it gets. What happens if you pull 2? Would your reaction be you lied to me? You said that there were more red and I pulled 2 blue, which means there must be more? No, I was right the entire time that there are more red. You're just misunderstanding how statistics work. If you believe that means that we have to reach in and grab out a red every single time. If this is a 60-40 matchup, Packers being the 60 and the Bears being the 40, if you are forced to pick, somebody put a gun to your head, I would tell you to pick the Packers, but I wouldn't feel great about your chances because you have a 40% chance of being dead. Does that make sense? And this is where the negative fans and everybody else wants to get all huffy. Oh, if you're so good, then why didn't you beat the Browns? I don't even know how to respond to that, dude. No game is 100%. I don't know that any games really get to like 70-30, but let's say it's a 70-30. Is it the shock of the century that you pull a 30%? No. If there's 70 reds and 30 blues and you reach in, you get to pull out one time you pulled out a blue, how much money would you, I mean, seriously, how much money would you bet on that? But the problem is that when we see that, we say, see, there must have been more blues. No, there's not. There's not. And just so we're all on the same page, more means better. The Packers are better. But they could play 5 times and the Packers win 4. They could win 5, they could lose 5. It doesn't change the fact of who's better, which is also why we end up coming full circle and saying, the old freaking Raiders thing, just win. Because being good, being better, it just gives you a slight edge. This is, by the way, also why I hate the whole all-in thing. This weird idea that if we just do something that it just guarantees us a Super Bowl, all it does is make you marginally better. And don't get me wrong, being better is going to help your odds of winning a Super Bowl, right? It's just like adding more red chips. But the problem is, let's say you can get to like 80-20 as far as how much better you are than everybody else in the playoffs, which I don't think has ever been a thing. Do you know how low your odds are of winning a Super Bowl? If you're 80-20 against the rest of the NFL, you've got about a 50% chance of winning the Super Bowl. And again, nobody's 80-20. If you're 70-30, you have a 34% chance of winning the Super Bowl, assuming you got that first round bye. This is kind of pivoting a little bit here. This is fundamentally why I don't like the all-in thing. Well, let me do this one. I can't get off this stuff. I'm just playing with it is why we're still going. An illustration for why I think all-in somewhat fails. And you can argue with me about what the numbers are. 4 playoff games you have to play, or 3 playoff and a Super Bowl, but there's 4 games you have to win. Let's assume you don't know you're getting the first round bye. We have to assume we get to the playoffs and we have to win all 4 games in a row. Let's say we're a really good team. We're a 60-40 team. When we get to the playoffs, we have about a 13% chance, despite the fact that we are the 60 compared to every other team in the playoffs. All the best teams, we're still 60-40 compared to them. Let's say we go all in and we add a big player, and that bumps us up to 65-35. Our odds go from about 13% to under 18% to win the Super Bowl. It doesn't move the needle all that much. The odds are you're still going to lose. It's also why the why don't you win more Super Bowls thing is stupid. Bro, it's a 13% chance of winning the Super Bowl if you are the best team in football, and by a decent margin. That means if you're a really good team, you have an 87% chance of not winning the Super Bowl. And I got to sit here and explain to you why we're not winning Super Bowls? I don't know, math? Frickin' A, dude. And you got to go to the playoffs like 5 times just to get to about 50-50 on whether or not you win a Super Bowl or not. Anyways, all right. I think we've exhausted this. I'm going to leave you with that. Go explore some of those things. I think it's good to kind of familiarize yourself with it. People come to me all the time. They're, asking me for ammunition against, Bears fans or Lions fans or Vikings fans. And again, AI is a very good resource just in terms of explaining things to you. For some people, this stuff is very easy to comprehend. For others, not so much. But can just help you to understand these things, or even just possibly make you feel better about the situation. Hey, Vegas says we're 6.5-point favorites, but the Bears have a better record, and I just don't know. I feel like if they were really that bad, they wouldn't have such a good record. Plug it in. Let it talk you through it. All right, I'm out of here. I got to do Packing It After Dark. Y'all have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
13%, that's the fraction they give us. Cold math on paper, but we came to deliver. January breath hanging frozen in Lambeau. 4 games, no bye week, we run through the gauntlet. Stack the attempts, let the compound stack with us year after year. Same knob, different band. There's a call it a long shot, I call it a process. Watch the denominator bow to the progress. 1 run with gambling, 2 runs with learning, 3 runs the tables turning, 4 runs the fire's burning, 5 runs to destiny. That's when the mad band more likely to hold it than ever since. 30% times the wheel that won't break. Keep rolling the dice till the numbers away. Probability shifts when the pressure won't end. Destiny, Vegas draws lines, but they can't draw conclusions. We're building equations while they're building illusions. 4th quarter, 2 minutes, ice in the system. Every snap is a variable, watch how we twist them. 0.87 to the 5th, that's the ceiling. Subtract it from 1 and you see what we're feeling. 51% says we've already won it. Somewhere in the timeline, the long body's coming. Stack the postseason, stack the cold Sundays. Let the math find us, face right behind us. 5 runs to destiny, that's when the math bends. More likely to hold it than ever since. 13% times the wheel that won't break. Keep rolling the dice till the numbers away. 5 runs, probability shifts when the pressure won't end. Wanna know when luck becomes law? When 13% stacks 5 times tall. The doubters do math, but they don't do the grind. We're living in futures they'll never find.